Hi, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on productive use of energy. My name is Lily Jinga. I am a Senior Climate and Energy Specialist at Abt Associates, and I will be moderating the session today. Today's webinar is focused on productive use of energy, specifically in the agriculture and health sectors. There are variations to how productive use of energy is defined, but essentially it refers to the use of energy to facilitate income generation and economic opportunity, as well as increased productivity across sectors. Our panel today will discuss what productive use of energy looks like in their work and speak to some of the related barriers, challenges, and opportunities to scale up current efforts. Our panelists include Henok Asefa, a managing partner at Precise, Tombo Banda, an associate principal at Cross Boundary, and Sheka Forna, country representative in Sierra Leone at Resolve. Since we have a limited amount of time together and want to allow for questions at the end, we won't do a round of introductions. Instead, I welcome you to look up everyone on LinkedIn if you want to learn more about our backgrounds. Before we jump into our panel discussion, I'd like to ask participants to please share questions you have for the panel in the chat throughout the session, and we can take a couple of questions at the end. Now, let's turn to our panel. Henok, let's start with you. Can you tell us about your work on productive energy use, both in agriculture and health, and what outcomes you have seen and expect?
Thank you, Lily. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for organizing this conversation. My name is Henok. I am the founder of Precise. We are a mission-driven firm. We believe in working with entrepreneurs to accelerate economic development. We're mainly focused on Ethiopia, but increasingly in the broader Horn of Africa, where quite a good number of people lack access to electricity, and SDG 7 is quite far behind. We're active in sectors where we believe in the greatest amount of economic empowerment can happen. And this is agriculture and agro-processing, which happens to employ up to 2/3 of the population with smallholder agriculture, and off-grid energy in a similar way, quite a lot of potential to empower small businesses and small farms. And the nexus, obviously, of agriculture and energy has quickly become a major area of focus for us. Increasingly, we are now focusing on health as well, because there's quite a lot of value add we could bring, especially from harnessing the private sector in Ethiopia and also harnessing off-grid energy. For us, I mean, we have some ambitious goals in this space, about 100,000 standalone productive units, productive use assets for agriculture and health is what we want to help deploy. We want to help create up to 1 million jobs. I think this is entirely possible within the context of the SDGs over the coming 8 to 10 years. And also we're looking at helping to start a couple of thousand livelihood, small businesses and health assets, health posts electrification in the coming couple of years. The way we work in this off-grid energy space, but actually everything that we do is very much focused on the scientific approach. So we like to learn, understand, theorize, and then pilot and sort of tweak things as they go along. So we undertake the assessments and the feasibility studies. Then we look at baseline data before we actually go out to do pilots, and then we can learn and adjust as we go along. And finally, obviously, we use a market ecosystem building approach. All of these solutions are going to be deployed by the private sector. So our final intent is, how do we make it productively possible and financially rewarding for entrepreneurs to develop and share these resources. And the potential is massive. I could not restate this. A recent study we did with the JCC shows over 100,000 jobs, 130,000 jobs actually are possible just using solar irrigation in horticulture alone. If you throw in a little bit of dairy processing and wheat milling, we're talking about over 200,000 jobs. So these are very simple initiatives that you could create a lot of jobs in. Broadly, electrifying irrigation could bring in up to $1.2 billion in annual value by 2025. This is a RMI study. And we can see similar possibilities in dairy and poultry and all other sectors. So what we're doing now is, now that we understand the potentials, we're going in and setting up pilots. Now we have solar milking machines up in 2 sites. We're looking at butter churners, milling, milk pulling and refrigeration, poultry lighting and heating appliances, egg incubators, grain milling, hydroponics, and then micro businesses like sewing machines and barbershops and hairdressers and those kind of, because this will enable the broadest number of Ethiopians to actually create jobs and across the Horn of Africa. Finally, we're looking at electrifying health centers. We have 1 project on the ground. Some of the early results we're seeing, these milking machines have just been up for like a few weeks now, but we're already seeing labor costs that are down up to 60% reduction. Milk production has increased by about 3 liters per day, as one of the entrepreneurs is telling us. Now, this is just early results. I don't want you to look too much into it. And then, of course, when they are milking with hand, there is a disease called mastitis that reduces productivity, but also damages the milking cows. That is being removed already. And in terms of the poultry sector, 1 entrepreneur we're working with that has 3,300 chicks. They're getting now 90 eggs per day. Now, that is no small amount. You know how much eggs cost in Ethiopia these days. So now we've already started looking at how we scale these interventions. And we've started working on incubator accelerator programs. And we're also looking at engaging the government of Ethiopia, the Ministry of Health, and a few of our partners like Selco Foundation, whom we work very closely with, to see if we could create a very large pilot project to electrify 200 health facilities over the next year. This is an area where we're developing and very much interested to hear from funders who might be out there. Let me stop there, Lily.
Great. Thanks for sharing that, Hanok. Really encouraging to hear about the early results from the pilot so far. Tombo, could you talk about your productive energy use studies in agriculture and some of the results of those studies?
Yes, thanks, Lily. So just to introduce myself, so Tombo Banda, I head up the innovation lab at Cross Boundary. And we really, at the lab, look at productive use of energy in context to the requirements for that energy and who's providing it. So the mandate of the innovation lab is to increase the profitability and the business viability for mini grids. So essentially to improve the mini grid business case by either reducing costs or increasing revenues. So we work with developers to test some of these innovations to achieve that. And one of the innovations that we do is appliance financing. So essentially this is providing productive use equipment, including mills, freezers, pumps, motors, bread making machines, what have you, to end users on credit, really with the primary goal of increasing consumption on the mini grid. And so what we see when you look at initial results for equipment such as grain mills is that productive use equipment has a significant impact on the mini grid business model in that the consumption is much higher for this productive use machinery compared to household machinery or really compared to other innovations. So, what are some of the results? If we look at milling, which is one of the most ubiquitous agricultural activities across the continent, one mill user actually consumes 8x the amount of a median user, and that has a significant effect on profitability of mini grids. We estimate, or our analysis shows that it can increase mini grid profitability by 11%. Fridges and freezers, our analysis shows that up to 5 of these can improve profitability by about 6%. And this, clearly has implications on the community level and also for the mini grids. So for the mini grids, a more profitable profitable business model means there'll be more investment into mini grids, and we have, electrification for up to 260 million people across the continent, for which mini grids are the least cost electrification method. And for the communities, increased access to productive use equipment powered by electricity is greener than diesel, and increasing access to this also allows those communities to, as Hanak was mentioning, increase their income, accrue other societal benefits, and really allow them to leverage the agricultural outputs that they are producing on site. So really from the perspective of the lab, that's some of the early results that we see. And yeah, really we're working on scaling these technologies so that we can have these benefits for both the developers and the communities.
That's great. Thanks, Tombo. I know you've also been focused on organizing a series of roadshows to promote productive use appliances. Could you share more about that and what your goals are with that initiative?
Yes, sure. So, so in terms of roadshows, we're actually working with ESMAP in Ethiopia at the moment, developing a series of roadshows. And the idea behind these roadshow programs is to have a consortium of the key stakeholders. So this includes machinery suppliers, financiers, relevant government agencies, and have this consortium visit site by site mini grids as they are commissioned under the Adele program by the World Bank, which will roll out several mini grids across Ethiopia. And the idea is, if you go to these communities as they're being electrified and inform them of, various productive use technologies that will now become relevant for them as they're electrified, this gives them the opportunity to know, not only what they can potentially now afford because it's financed, but also the economic and social benefits that they will get. And importantly, an important part is to engage them on, how to use this machinery, if it's new machinery that community hasn't used, and how it compares to either alternatives or what is the current business as usual. So it's really an approach to say, how do you roll this out? How do you roll out appliance financing across the country? How do you introduce newly electrified communities to new technologies in the most efficient way? So that's what we're doing with roadshows.
That's great. That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Sheka, can you tell us about the Health Grid project in Sierra Leone and the types of productive use of energy equipment you plan to install in the health facilities there?
Certainly, Lily. And thanks very much for giving us the opportunity to talk about the Health Grid and the work that we're doing here. Health Grid is a USAID GDA, a global development alliance between and including Orange SL, Resolve, who I'm employed for in Sierra Leone, Gavi, World Vision, and the Ministry of Health and Sanitation in Sierra Leone, also supported by Bechtel. Sierra Leone, like many countries across Africa, I should say, sorry, not just West Africa, is plagued by an absence of electricity. And when we have issues both with our ability to generate and also our ability to distribute, which means that large elements of our geography and our communities are left without access to reliable electricity. Albeit that there are initiatives in place to both generate and to distribute, it's understood that for many years to come, some communities will remain beyond the reach of those initiatives. Health Grid was developed in an effort to address that. It's recognized that reliable access to electricity is a foundation for essential healthcare. And public health services, including, wash, communication, cold storage, etc., and the ability to use basic medical diagnostic equipment. The WHO recognizes that 34% of health facilities in sub-Saharan Africa do not have access to reliable electricity, I should say, sorry. And Sierra Leone is no different from that. And in fact, I would argue that it's probably more so the case here than elsewhere. I think if we look at the working title of Health Grid, which was Micro-Utilities for Community Health, that kind of sums up what our approach was. And the partners essentially bring those items to bear. So Orange has a long-term ambition to expand its digital footprint, providing internet facility across the country. And as a partner, will provide connectivity to the health centres. We at Resolve are managing, looking at the implementation of the programme. World Vision are providing wash facilities, and the Ministry of Health and Sanitation are coordinating it from the perspective of their various facilities. The goal of the program is to install solar power at the moment in 31 off-grid health centres, but that will in time increase to many more. We're working with several vendors of solar power in Sierra Leone, and expect to begin deploying those facilities in the coming months. A key element to this is sustainability, and I think where this program is perhaps different to some other programs that have provided off-grid electricity is that we're planning to ensure that these facilities are sustained into the future. And in doing so, and I think we'll perhaps talk about this later, in doing so, we're generating over and above the requirements of the health facilities, with a surplus being sold into local communities, and the monies from that going into an operations and maintenance fund that will ensure the longevity of the equipment. From the perspective of usage, first and foremost, we'll be powering equipment within the centres. I mean, as well as lights, it'll be computers, fridges, water pumps that will in turn allow for the provision of wash facilities. We're in discussion with a drones company who will be deploying electronic drones, which will help with the distribution, for example, of medicines and vaccines, and who will be able to recharge their equipment at the centres. We're working with local communities where people can take up productive use of electricity through the charging of batteries, phones, access to connectivity, mobile money, etc. And then lastly, there's, as I say, the connectivity element, allowing the health centres immediate connectivity through the internet to their HQ and other institutions.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. What are some of the expected economic benefits of using this equipment and the appliances in these health facilities?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, again, we haven't actually run the numbers ourselves on this particular program, but it's well recognised that there are spin-offs that come from promoting healthcare. Again, OECD Observer has shown that a 10% increase in life expectancy ensures economic growth of about 0.4% per annum. There's a reduction in the cost of individuals of engaging in healthcare, whether that be transport costs or the costs of procuring medicines, etc. There are immediate economic spin-offs to the health centres themselves and their ability to actually store medicines on site. The dissemination of information and the rapid dissemination of information brings about immediate benefits. From the perspective of the cost of maintaining centres, centres at the moment that utilise generators will see an immediate benefit through the utilisation of solar power over that. From the general spin-offs of the community, the GSMA and others have looked at the correlation between connectivity and particularly the ability to use mobile money and the economic spin-offs that come from that, and in terms of local economic conditions. So the facilitation of trade, for example, and remittances, access to financial services, market information, etc., that allow people to trade and engage in financial activity much more competitively and compellingly.
Thanks for that, Sheka. And thanks all for those examples on how you're approaching productive use of energy and what it really looks like in practice. I'd like us to talk a bit about some barriers and challenges that you've been encountering. We can start with Henok. What kind of barriers are you experiencing in Ethiopia?
Thank you, Lily. First of all, I just want to congratulate my colleagues out there. This is really groundbreaking stuff that could make a big difference in the lives of lots and lots of people. So the challenges pale in comparison in that sense, but in absolute terms, they are quite significant. I mean, where do I start? For this whole sector itself is quite new for everyone. So, you know, the end users don't know it so much. The businesses don't invest as much in it because not enough people in the technical knowledge is not the engineering capacity. A lot of this is limited. Banks don't understand it. Microfinances have gotten used to lighting products, but productive use is still something of a puzzle for many of them. So not easy to find the financing. So, you know, all of these are unfamiliarity or newness of the sector is quite a bit of a challenge. I would say something relatively unique for Ethiopia and maybe Nigeria these days is Forex. That's a very big, real challenge on the ground for us because most of these units come from overseas and we're kind of dependent on our ability to import, and we have severe shortages of foreign currency. So that means products are unavailable. That also means the products are expensive when they are available. So this presents quite a bit of challenge. These need the products and the services, the value add is quite high, but it needs to make sense for the users to purchase. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to scale it up. So this is massive structural challenge that we're facing. And then finally, I mean, the general business enabling environments is quite difficult to where we operate. We don't do this stuff. Government doesn't do this stuff. Entrepreneurs do this stuff. And I think that understanding needs to deepen. And in this case, we're not just asking entrepreneurs to go and, you know, ride a bicycle or do something they're used to doing. We're asking them to innovate technology. We're asking them to innovate business models. We're asking them to do things that are highly risky. So not only creating an enabling environment, but also incentivizing risk takers, making it easy and as much as possible profitable to engage in these high risk enterprises. For instance, risk capital is almost entirely absent in our environment. This is something that we hope to see very much. I could probably list another 10, but I'll just stop right there.
Thanks, Henok. So given some of those major challenges or barriers that you've mentioned, how are you all tackling those? How are you addressing those challenges?
Yeah, so a lot of education, really, a lot of coordination with actors. I mean, the familiarity part is very difficult to get going until it's sort of a snowball. So a lot of these studies we're doing, sensitizations, trade shows, all of these are going to help. But also now that we have demonstrations on the ground. We have, you know, a couple of weeks ago, I posted on social media the milking machine, and I mean, it was the wild tweet of the week around the social space. People were fascinated by that. So we're trying to help educate these entrepreneurs and users that there is something called off-grid energy that offers cheaper, faster deploying potential to enable economic development. We're also starting an incubator accelerator program in partnership with Selco Foundation of India, who has lots of experience doing this work. We are working to identify and sort of systematically remove some of the challenges that are faced by these startup and growth entrepreneurs. So that's on the first part. On Forex, this is a massive national challenge. All we could do is see if we can reduce it. And we have a pilot project we've designed with Shell Foundation, which is now being implemented in partnership with our Ministry of Water and our Ministry of Irrigation for productive use and solar lighting products. And we are going to provide targeted support and incentives for assemblers and manufacturers of these products so that we can optimize the use of foreign currency within the country while obviously creating jobs, hitting the first objective of catalyzing learning, all of these spillovers as well. So this is for foreign currency. We're also working on policy advocacy to make sure that this sector gets the priority it deserves at the national level in terms of Forex access. In terms of the general business environment, I would say there's a number of working groups. Our government is very much interested in learning and figuring out how to create an enabling environment. We're helping to co-chair and run a few working groups there. So the only way to make this happen is for our public sector and our private sector to work towards a common vision and actually really reduce those barriers. All we do from the back is help coordinate and provide some assistance. So we think these will go a long way in sort of igniting this sector.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Hanak. Tombo, you've come across a range of financial and market-related barriers to productive energy use in agriculture. Could you share some examples of those?
Yeah, definitely. And I think I'll be echoing a lot of what Hanak was saying. But, when we think of our three big barriers in the work that we see on scaling productive use of machinery, there's really three. So two market-related, one financial. So the first one on market-related is around the machinery itself. As Hanak mentioned, it needs to make financial sense for the end user and for the developer, whoever is providing this service. If you have machinery that doesn't compete in terms of cost and technical performance with current alternatives, it's not going to work. Or if it's too expensive to be used, no one is going to take it up. So the first barrier is actually having that high-performing machinery, electrically powered in our context, that really does compete with diesel alternatives, and that meets the output on a technical performance level of current practices. So that's the first one. The second one is actually the effective supply chain. So we need to get this machinery from, first of all, the urban centers where it's either been imported into or where it has been assembled, to the rural centers, to then the last mile. And this supply chain can also add a lot of cost. Supply chain also encompasses not only the machinery itself, but how do you service that machinery? Do you have the right spare parts? Do you have the right maintenance? You can't just leave a piece of machinery in a community, which if it breaks down, that community will be at a loose end for months on end. That is not sustainable. So how do we get the supply chains for this now effective machinery to be effective and cheap to those last mile rural customers? And then on the purely financial related, it's really affordable financing products. So, we see that, to get these productive use machinery to scale, that cost, the upfront cost of that machinery is essentially prohibitive. You need to be able to provide credit that is affordable, that is flexible, that takes into account, rural incomes and their variability, that allows these end users to then purchase these productive use machineries to be used, as we said, competitively with diesel alternatives or business as usual alternatives. So I'd say those are the three key barriers. So the high-performing machinery itself, the effective supply chains, and then the flexible and affordable financing.
Mhm. Yeah, thanks, Tombo. The same question that I asked Henok, how are you addressing these challenges and barriers?
Yeah. So starting at the top with the machinery aspect of it, you know, one thing, if I take grain mills as an example, as the most ubiquitous productive use equipment, we see that at present the tariffs of the electricity sometimes don't match the throughput, the texture, the fineness of the machinery that's available on the market right now doesn't match the needs of the people on the ground. So we are securing R&D funding to allow us to, number one, update and edit and establish, what are the key customer KPIs in those markets. What is the finest? What is the throughput? What is the price that we need in different geographies to make it make sense in those geographies? We're also securing R&D funding into conversions. So, if someone has already sunk cost into purchasing a big diesel grain mill, can we convert that diesel grain mill to an electric grain mill? What would be the technical performance of that? What additional ancillary equipment do we need for that? Do we need soft starters? What else do we need to make it work? So on high-performing machinery, it's really the R&D funding around establishing, what those customer KPIs are and what the industry needs to supply the market with in order for it to make sense. On effective supply chains, what we've been looking at doing is really creating linkages across different stakeholders. So, how do we connect machinery suppliers with agricultural input distributors, right, who are already getting to those last mile locations? How do we use those existing routes to unlock supply of these machinery and these spare parts to those places? How do we leverage existing mechanics or technicians in the villages who are attending to other machinery or other equipment in the village to now attend to the new productive use equipment? So really trying to create linkages with existing and complementary stakeholders. And then lastly, on the financing side, so we have been working across various programs with different financiers. So that's the commercial banks, also working with DFIs and MFIs to, really identify the incentives that will allow the financiers to provide these flexible financing terms to rural customers who are very hard to assess for creditworthiness, very expensive to assess for creditworthiness. How do we bring down that risk barrier to the financiers for serving these rural customers? And then how do we bring down the cost, the interest cost, to then make it make sense for the rural customers to access these products? So we're working with commercial banks, DFIs, MFIs to figure out those incentives.
Great, thanks so much, Tombo. Sheka, how are you addressing the challenges that come with sustaining long-term operations and maintenance of equipment and appliances that are installed in healthcare facilities?
Thanks, Lily. I think first and foremost, we're identifying and working with partners who have a vested interest in keeping the equipment working. And by vested interest here, we mean a vested financial interest. So in the case, in the Sierra Leone example, we're working with Orange. Orange are the local local mobile network operator who are a subsidiary of Orange, the much larger French telecoms firm. Orange themselves have an interest in expanding their network connectivity to include obviously a greater geographic reach, but also a greater reach of populace, and they see direct financial benefits that spring from that. Whether it be the use, an increased use of voice, whether it be an increased use of data, whether it be an increased use of mobile money. As a result of that, they have a real desire to ensure that the equipment that is installed, continues to function and continues to help them to power their activities. Alongside that, and albeit that the health centres are the principal beneficiaries of the electricity that's generated, we're speccing the equipment so that there is a surplus, both of water and of electricity, I should say. That surplus, the intention is that that surplus will be marketed to the local communities. And again, we're talking, primarily about off-grid communities. We're identifying local entrepreneurs and, companies already in that space, who will sell or repackage and sell the electricity and water onto the community, generating an income for themselves and giving a small surplus that will revert back to a fund that will be held for ongoing O&M, operations and maintenance, going forward. In addition to that, we're working to identify other commercial partners who will have a long-term interest in the continued viability of the off-grid of the solar facilities. In the context of Soliane, for example, there's a company who engage in the business of powering up car batteries, and those car batteries in turn provide are rented out on a daily basis to individuals within the community who use them to run their own businesses or indeed to sort of power up their homes and pay a small fee for that. Again, money from that comes back to the O&M fund. And we're looking for other partners who are in that field and having discussions with people along those lines. So it's early days yet. It's a relatively unique model. I'd like to believe it will work, but it's still untested.
Thanks, Sheka. We look forward to seeing what comes out of HealthGrid in the next year and year after that. Thank you all for sharing some of the key challenges and barriers you're seeing and how you're actively working to address them. I have one last question I'd like each of you to answer, and that is, what do you see as the most essential elements for successfully scaling up productive energy use to be able to reach and benefit more people? Maybe we can start with Henok and then Tombo and then Sheka.
Thanks, Lily, again. I think, we often forget, again, entrepreneurs make all of these problems go away. Entrepreneurs convert these challenges into opportunities. I think at the end of the day, the key game changer here is going to be, can we create an environment that's going to enable them, incentivize them, de-risk them, provide capabilities across the country, skills, policy. All of these things are going to be quite critical because the sector is under innovation, and even though it provides immense value to society and even to the climate as at the global level, it's still quite difficult and it's still quite early days. So the innovators must be supported. The innovators must be assisted and incentivized. First movers, they shoulder all the risk. So I could not emphasize enough of that. We need more of them, and we need quick successes, people who can show off and actually show the way for others to follow them. So the ecosystem will also build. In that respect, I'm quite excited in terms of the Ethiopian ecosystem. There have been a number of significant structural challenges like telecommunications, mobile money, banking services. We're seeing so much happening in that sector now in terms of the forum. Safaricom just started operating telecoms in Ethiopia. They just got an approval to do mobile money, M-Pesa as well. Ethio Telecom itself now went from 0 users to 23 million users of mobile financial services in like less than a year. So it's really quite exciting there. And recently we just heard about the banking sector being liberalized. This is going to go very far, and I think creating that enabling environment for the entrepreneurs. Quickly, the second one is again related to creating that innovation ecosystem. You know, the business models and the financing innovations must continue. We need to have a lot more catalytic capital, a lot of donors out there who are not even sure where to put their money. I think they should consider doing that. Catalytic financing, blended financing mechanisms to de-risk the investments in these sector are going to be absolutely critical. We also need more risk capital. I've said it before, but what I haven't said earlier is really subsidies. Now, subsidies are a bad word in economics in many cases. In this case, I don't see any other way out. We need supply side subsidies. We also need end user subsidies. We need to empower people farther and farther away from the major cities so that they can kind of bootstrap themselves up gradually. And it's, as a matter of equity, they need to be able to do that. So at the end, that also helps to make the business models viable, and the ability to scale up these solutions is going to be much better if we can do that. So I would argue very strongly for supply side subsidies and end user subsidies, because this is just no way around it. And then maybe finally, I would say as the third is learning and skills. This is absolutely essential. Again, whenever, you know, economic development is basically a factor of learning. When we learn how to do things better, we produce more with less. It's as simple as that. We need to all learn, the entrepreneurs need to learn the new skills on how to create viable products and solutions that could uplift the population and make money. Policymakers need to learn how to make it easy for these entrepreneurs to work and still regulate them and create competition, all of those things. And the banks need to learn how to finance and support these potentially very, 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 very lucrative areas of finance. And then, of course, manpower in general. We need skills. We need, especially in Africa, we know what we don't need is foreign operators to come in and do EPC contracts and leave. I am so against this in so many ways. We don't have local skills available. Are we going to call Europeans and Chinese worksmen whenever a bulb is not working, or just we need to screw down some part of the system? This is completely unacceptable. We need to have the skills to maintain the systems. We need to have the skills to even manufacture them. I would argue Africa is going to be the next step for the manufacturing industry. I think right now, assembly makes a lot of sense on the continent if the government and the private sector coordinate well. But I also think, and there's some entrepreneurs in Ethiopia that are that keep headbutting me for just saying assembly because they think we could do much better. We have an entrepreneur in Bahir Dar working in Ethiopia who could go up to 50% value addition if he has partners to work with in terms of removing some of these foreign currency and financing challenges. So 3 areas. I mean, skills are important. Business models and financial models are important. We really all need to learn a lot of things really fast.
Thank you, Hanak. Tombo?
Yeah, I just want to fully endorse and agree with what Hanok said. I think I will, focus on one core element, which I see as the, essential catalyst to generating scale of productive use. And it's the first thing that Hanok really touched on, which is, private sector involvement. And when I think about private sector involvement, not only do we need more entrepreneurs in the space, but we also need the large manufacturers in the space. And the private sector, once they are aware of the extent of the opportunity that is existing across the continent, millions of people, millions of products and services, they will step in and this thing will scale. But in order to get the private sector involved and able to operate, we do need to de-risk their participation And this is dependent on all these things that Hanok has already laid out. So, number one, on the financing side, how do we de-risk the provision of those services and the access to those services? On the R&D side, how do we put in the right amount of money to bring down the cost? Even on the entrepreneur participation side, how do we bring down the cost of capital, the cost of access to this capital to enable these entrepreneurs and these businesses to scale up, right? So if I was to say what I think is the most essential element, it's simply this. We need more private sector participation. And for that, we need to, de-risk across the whole value chain. Thanks.
Thank you, Tombo. Sheka?
Yeah, I'd just really like to endorse, what the other panelists have just said. I think they very neatly summed up a lot of the issues that we've been facing and will continue to face moving forward. Indeed, if one looks at your earlier question about barriers, and in many ways, what we're just doing here is looking at the flip side of that and saying, well, how does one overcome those barriers? And I think Tom was absolutely right. From our perspective, we need the private sector to get much more engaged. We need entrepreneurs to step forward and take up these initiatives. USAID have provided the initial funding to allow us to go ahead with this program, but to all intents and purposes, USAID should be a catalyst and nothing more. Once we should be able to take ownership of these programs. We should be able to understand the benefits that that will flow. Both developmentally and also, financially for private sector partners. The regulatory regimes need to be put in place. We have a myriad of rules and regulations that pertain to the installation of power. We have rules and regulations that pertain to utilities, to the sale of water and electricity. Those need to be looked at. And not just on an individual case-by-case basis, but across the whole, to allow people to step into the space with a full understanding of what is required of them, but also what benefits will flow to them over time. Again, allusion was made earlier to the costs. We're importing equipment. There's a massive capital cost to that, and in fact, we've had to revise our budget several times over the last few months as the cost of manufacture and the cost of transportation has increased dramatically. We need to start producing stuff closer to home. I mean, there may be things we can't produce, but there are things that can be assembled locally, and we need to be working towards that. Maintenance in itself is a challenge. Obviously, there's a challenge that is presented by the absence of training and skills. That needs to be addressed. But equally, parts. In some instances, you find that parts are thousands of miles away across the globe. We need to start having those closer to home, potentially manufacturing them closer to home, if not storing. And lastly, it's about sort of just getting partnerships together. They say in Surleon, you can't pick up a stone with one finger. I think we need to start looking across at where partnerships can be forged. That will help us to seize opportunities where they exist, such as this, and work together to move forward.
Great. Thank you, Sheka. And thanks so much for those responses. I think we've learned a lot from you so far. Your perspective and experiences are really helpful in this growing sector that is becoming more important for us to focus on. I'd like to take some time to take some of the questions from participants. I think we have time for maybe one or two questions. The first one is from JV Jarvis at Abt Associates. She says, we've been doing a lot of thinking about the potential for women and young people to participate in the renewable energy workforce. Could panelists share their thoughts on how productive use of energy are or might be supporting inclusion of people traditionally less involved in this sector? I'll open it up to any of you to kick us off you have any thoughts on that?
We're all being polite, but I want to let you guys go first because I've been going first for a while.
Fair enough. I was going to say it's most relevant for you, but I think from the perspective of the lab, yeah, women in particular, participating in the energy workforce is a huge problem. We just did an analysis on our last appliance financing program on one of our biggest sites. And we found that only 20% of all the loans offered were awarded to women. And this is, a missed opportunity across the board for both communities and developers. And, I think, one way in which we involve women more, I'll focus on that because that was the aim of that analysis, is to, from the outset, engage women's groups to understand what their needs are across the productive use, what equipment is most relevant for them, and over-index supplying those and prioritizing those machineries to these communities so that they can really participate in these income-generating activities that they want to, and the offering is not skewed towards the status quo. So I think that's how we are thinking about it going forward. Any of our appliance financing programs must give, at least 50% of all loans offered to women. So, one way to do that is just to kind of mandate, specific floors of what can be accessed by women and youth for these programs and over-indexing on their needs in order to increase participation. Over to you, Hannah.
Thanks, Tombo. Those are excellent points. What I would add from my side is, we need to remember the energy, productive use energy, essentially, we don't do the energy for its own sake, but to power other sectors. And quite a few of these sectors that have applicability are actually very much women-driven sectors. If you look at poultry, for instance, tends to require a lot of attention to detail, and women entrepreneurs across the continent tend to do a lot of the work there. So, poultry solutions, dairy solutions. If we look at horticulture, irrigation horticulture in Ethiopia, massive opportunity. I mean, some number I saw recently is like literally in the hundreds, maybe a couple of million hectares of land that could be irrigated, and they could grow vegetables. Now, most farming, about 90% of it in Ethiopia, is done during the rainy season, the long rains, what we call them, the Mahar rainy season. And for most of the rest of the year, we are not really doing farming. So that productivity can go 2x or 3x immediately. And a lot of the jobs created are actually women jobs. On the flip side, we could see a lot of these appliances then also help to reduce the jobs burden on women, especially in rural areas. We know already in the second industrial revolution, we created the most opportunity for most of the rich world now in terms of transforming lives. And the driving force was the electricity and internal combustion engine. And that reduced the amount of the work that women used to do around the house, but also in doing income generating activities. It could be like sewing machines or whatsoever. And in rural Ethiopia, conditions are such that a lot of this work is still being undertaken by women. So I think productive use of energy could transform the lives of women in this way. And obviously, again, it's a well-known fact that investing in women then has a secondary benefit in terms of how children are taken care of, nutrition is improved, and so on.
Thanks, Hannah. Sheka, did you have a comment you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, again, just to echo Hedek's first point, to say that it's not just about the sort of physical maintenance and ongoing installation, and ongoing maintenance of the equipment itself, but it's the benefits that pertain to that equipment. And in particular, in our experience, it's about connectivity, and within connectivity, it's particularly about mobile payments. A lot of women in rural areas are involved in petty trade. Connectivity allows them easier access to market, easier access to price, for example, pricing information, etc. It allows them to talk directly to their suppliers and indeed their off-takers. It allows them to access to financial services. It allows the transactions to take place at distance, which and potentially greater volumes, and it allows them to hold on to their own money, rather than putting it into a family pot. So there are a string of benefits that directly pertain that pertain from that. With regard to the equipment itself, and sorry again, many of the vendors that, albeit that we're trying to pioneer an operations and maintenance element to our own program, we are basing that on examples we've seen elsewhere. And I think it's true to say that a lot of vendors of electricity and water in the Sierra Leonean context are women. Equally, a lot of people who are engaged in healthcare are women, and part of what we want to do is to ensure that at least very basic maintenance of the equipment that's put into health centres should be within the capacity of the staff of those health centres, for which they'll get a small stipend, and the beneficiaries of that will be women, or overwhelmingly, I should say, will be women.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. Thank you all for those responses. I think we're almost at the end of our session, so we won't be able to take any more questions. But I'd like to say a big thank you to our panelists for their time today, and thank you for everyone for joining us and sharing your questions. We have recorded this session, and we'll be able to share it with everyone who attended, and we'll be posting it across our social media platforms, so please look out for that. We also plan to publish a blog and a white paper on productive energy use in the health and agriculture sectors, and those will be posted in the upcoming weeks. Lastly, if you would like to contact me or any of the panelists, please feel free to connect with us via LinkedIn. And then just a big thank you again for everyone, and we look forward to seeing you again at one of our upcoming webinars.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Lily.